everyone, and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann. You can call me H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal. You can call me Q.
And we're joined today by a third member who is not named Ryan, confusingly enough. So, I thought that there was a certain kind of membership card that you had to hold to get in here. Otherwise I wouldn't have kept suppressing month after month that my real name is Zanzibar. But anyways, this is our good friend from the Cane and Rinse podcast and from his work that surely by now you're familiar with elsewhere. At least you should be, because it's uniformly excellent. Mr. Jacob Geller.
Hi, I'm Jacob. You can call me Ryan.
That works, actually. So we have HQ and Ryan.
Yes.
Perfect.
For the next 45 minutes or so.
All right. Well, I guess since you are new on this podcast, I don't know how many listeners we realistically have that don't also sample Cane and Rinse and Sound of Play and other places where you might be familiar with Jacob. But why don't you kind of give some background as to the types of games that you like to play, the types of media you like to consume, just what are the points of reference?
Prove to us you're not a fake gamer.
And then try to sell us your bathwater.
Okay, number one, I'm a fake ass gamer boy. Yeah, so I really am quite kind of, I take wide genres, I like everything. I feel like I am generally known for, to whatever extent I'm known, kind of doing the weirder, more artsy stuff, or at least approaching games in a kind of more unorthodox direction.
Oh, this is going to be terrible. This is a really horrible fit for our podcast. Yeah. I'm sorry, but we're just going to have to kick
I know you
now.
guys are kind of straight down the middle gamers here, but
yeah, we're pretty much just World of Warcraft on the weekdays and Call of Duty on the weekends. Sorry.
That's how I like it, baby. So if you're familiar with my YouTube channel, which is just Jacob Geller et al., you'll know that I really like kind of architecture and talking about how architecture influences games. I like space a lot.
Space as in spaces, or space as in Star Wars?
I'll take both, but Star Wars and more, I think, kind of what's a good property that has the existential dread of space, kind of like 2001. I like to be horrified by the abyss, and that has been
Super Mario Galaxy, the true existential terror of being sucked into a black hole.
I have a video that is very close to that. I feel like I don't talk about gameplay very much in the kind of stuff that I do, and it's not because I don't value it, but there are lots of people who are really good at talking about gameplay already, and I feel like what I can do is talk about how the 1893 World's Fair relates to Mirror's Edge or something, which is equally valid. Mom.
That's right. So Jacob's been producing some excellent video essays recently, and a lot of them are kind of adaptations of things that he's previously written for Cane and Rinse, but adapted to the new 21st century lazy format of I just want to sit down and watch somebody explain something to me. I don't want to have to use my own eyes to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes about 100 more hours on my end, but it takes you much less effort.
It saves about half an hour on my end, so I think we can call it about even.
Collectively, the thousands of half an hours saved, though, surely it must end up saving something.
I'm providing a public service, really.
Yeah, so check those out. Personal recommendation there. They just continue to be very different from one another. You can kind of get a sense of what a creator is comfortable talking about through the various videos that they create. And Jacob always puts out things that are in completely different avenues and completely different. Some will be talking about history of jazz music, and some of them will be talking about the history of Jews representation in media and the Holocaust and stuff like that. And so it's kind of all ends of the spectrum, all very interesting, all very well researched and engagingly put together. So check out the YouTube, check out Cane and Rinse, where you can also hear him and some of us as well. And I think your Twitter is probably a good place to connect to it all. Did we answer, why don't you give maybe 5 things you've been consuming recently, games and otherwise,
I can answer your question now.
Your starting place.
I have also been playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I think I started, I don't know, 6 months ago, and it's just kind of like a game that I play for like, you know, a half hour a night.
Sounds about
and
right.
kind of like just go in a direction and do some things. I've been enjoying that. Something about me that you will know if you follow me on Twitter is I play Beat Saber almost every day. Beat Saber is like my treadmill or whatever, where I'll come home from work and kind of have that tiredness of when you've been sitting in a chair all day and for some reason it makes you more tired. And so I'll like make myself play Beat Saber for a while, and that's my thing to like get my heart rate up and get going. I have been emulating Shadow of the Colossus, the original PS2 game, on my computer, which is kind of the first steps I've taken into PS2 emulation, and that is for an upcoming video, so keep your eyes open.
Are you doing any of the out of bounds stuff or hacking?
Yeah, I am not doing the out of bounds stuff myself, but the video is kind of about that. And like I have talked to Nomad Colossus before, who's like kind of the guy who does that stuff. So yeah, I find that whole world really fascinating.
And you slayed him as well, which, you know, seemed unnecessary at the time, but when you go back to it, the video game had been rewarding you for doing so for anything called a Colossus to that point, and so you can't really blame yourself.
I look back and regret, but it was a really climactic moment, and the music was like really strong. So, and then I've also been playing Observer, because that's a Kanan Rentz coming up, and it's a good cyberpunk weird acid trip of a game.
All right. Well, I guess with that out of the way, now that we fully understand you as a person and your points of artistic reference, would you like to, and we always give the choice to the guests that are on the show, would you like to present first and get it out of the way, or would you like to hang back and save the best for last?
With that introduction, I think I'll go first.
Okay. Yeah, so the way that this works for you and for the listeners that are uninitiated, we don't explain the rules very often on the podcast. It's probably good to do that every once in a while.
The Geller herd, the Jacob Geller fans that are coming to us.
That's right.
The Geller heads, the Geller herds. I don't know what you call them, Jacob, but if you're unacquainted, H is laying down the rules.
That's right. So the way that this podcast works is that we pitch 3 video games every week, usually one from me and one from Q, and then one from the community as well. But since Jacob's on the show and we both are as well, we're going to kind of count his as the community pitch, continue to amass those. We read a community pitch every normal week on the podcast. We'll give the contact details a bit later. But if you have anything you'd like to share, then we welcome all submissions, especially when we're running low. That is always appreciated. But the way that this works is that you have as much time or as little time as you want to detail just whatever you want to say about this idea for a video game that you have. Nothing is off limits, I guess, within reasonable standards.
Within some limits.
Yeah, okay. Nothing is off limits. And basically, once you are done stating the initial pitch, the elevator pitch, then we start a timer for 10 minutes. And at the end of 10 minutes, we basically have to close it down, come up with a name for what we've created. And the game isn't done. We put it out there to the community. And if they have anything that they would like to add to it, we always welcome that feedback. But for our intents and purposes, we just gonna have to let the baby bird fly and see where it goes. So I guess with that, let's go ahead and get started. If you want to give us the initial details, we promise to break it completely and to build it into something that's probably nothing like the original pitch, but that's the way it goes sometimes.
Okay, so here's the pitch. Video game remakes are real popular, and there are a lot of kinds of them. There are the kinds that are just up-resed versions of the original, like Shadow of the Colossus on the PS3, where it's exactly the same, it's just running at 1080. There are ones that have totally new graphics, like Shadow of the Colossus on the PS4, where it's, still kind of the same game, but it is built from the ground up, new engine, using modern techniques, all of that. And then there are ones that are more or less a different game with the same title, like Resident Evil 2, the new one.
Right.
And I think one of the coolest things that I've seen in a game remake is the thing in Halo, like the Halo 1 and 2 remakes, where you could push a button and you could switch from the new graphics that they had made back to the old, like, original Xbox ones, and you could see how far the game had come, you know, because it's easy when you're playing these to be like, this looks like it looked in my memory. But then when you actually see how it looked, you're like, oh my gosh, gaming has moved forward a lot. That's one part. Then, I assume both of you are familiar with what some have called the best single-player first-person campaign of all time, Titanfall 2, and specifically maybe the best level in that game, Effect and Cause, where you have a kind of time travel device that allows you to jump back and forth between two parallel realities at different times, and there are different things happening in those. So in one reality, the floor might be on fire, and in the other, the floor isn't, or in one, it's full of kind of like dinosaurs.
It's more interesting than that in the game. That's not the internal fiction. In this world, the floor is on fire.
Isn't that crazy?
It's pretty crazy. Or, you know, more interestingly, there are enemies in both timelines, but they're different enemies. And so, you know, some are kind of like panthers that are jumping on you, and some are kind of like guys with guns. And so you're hopping out of the frying pan into the fire often by kind of switching between these two. So here's the pitch, is to take a game that we know pretty well, remake it, but remake it different enough that you can flip back and forth through those parallel realities and kind of develop some sort of strategy, or have some part of the gameplay be that you actually have to change between the old game and the new game in order to, like, progress the overall story.
Let's go ahead and start the clock there. We've got 10 minutes to work this out. So usually at the start of these pitches, I like to throw out a few kind of reference points of other games that have tried similar things. And this is not to, always not to put somebody in a place of having to be like, well, you know, your idea isn't that original. Like, it's just to, it's kind of like a further readings list. If people are interested in this, then check out these other ideas and other ways that people have kind of delivered on this. And so I just wanted to throw a few more kind of examples out there. I think the first time I remember seeing something like this was the Secret of Monkey Island remakes that they did for PC, Xbox 360, iPhone, back in the day. And that was super cool, being able to swap between not only the graphical style, but it would also change the way that the game was played, in that you swap from the kind of contextual clicking that you got in the remake to the classic LucasArts verb grid, and having to kind of adapt in those circumstances. And you can even change, like, whether the music also changed to the old MIDI orchestrations, and whether the voice acting continued in the old style, which was new for the special editions. So that was really cool. I also wanted to throw out a reference point. It's a totally different thing, but whenever it comes to kind of like shifting dimensions, I think it's always cool the way that Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver did it, where instead of like zapping between dimensions, you kind of see everything kind of mold and bend around you. And just watching that transformation, like, especially keeping in mind like the year that it was released, is like insane that they were able to pull that off. So really cool stuff there. There's one point I wanted to bring up as a possible entry point or a possible challenge to avoid. We'll just have to see how we take it. In the Halo remakes, which you talked about, there were a lot of, maybe not a lot of, but definitely some players that were complaining about that the logic of the game didn't seem to be updated, in that there would be like heavy foliage in the new game because the new engine can render that. Since that foliage wasn't present in the old game that you can swap back to, the AI didn't take that into account. And so as far as they were concerned, if you were crouched in the middle of a big bush, then you would still be fully visible. And a lot of people found that really frustrating. So, you know, maybe some aspect of kind of transitory cover or something like that. It's a very easy way to take it. But I just want to throw those points out there, and let's see what else we can do.
Yeah, that idea of the kind of like different the like different map layouts in the Halo things is something that I like really want to dive into. I think in the Titanfall 2 map, I saw like a GDC talk or something where they talked about how they weren't the same map. They were actually like stacked on top of each other in physical virtual space. And then the player would themselves be teleported between those two levels. And so this is kind of, in that Halo example, it would be like two levels with fully separate AI patterns and stuff, which might be hard to pull off, but I think would be just so cool in kind of like both in some kind of like actual gameplay sense, but also just kind of like how has AI changed in the past 15 years or whatever game we decide to remake.
I was just thinking that there's something about this that screams Resident Evil to me. I feel like if you could, because Resident Evil is a game that's very much structured around rooms and puzzles, and in the case of that recent Resident Evil 2 remake and the original Resident Evil 2, you have like a contained space that gets slightly tweaked, things are in slightly different locations or things like that. I wonder if you could get more extreme with that and have events that take place in the remake that fundamentally alter or change the environment or the things that you have to do. And then, of course, being able to jump back and forth and maybe retrieve an object the old way and bring it into the new way. Maybe the object is just gone in the new, remake style.
I'm kind of trepidatious to throw this out there because it might completely change things. Not that that's a problem, but I don't want to get too sidetracked if this is way too off course. So we can throw this out if so. But we've seen some remakes that are relatively straightforward in their implementation, like Shadow of the Colossus is kind of what you would imagine a modern Shadow of the Colossus being. But some games like Resident Evil 2, you can kind of even argue that it's a different genre in a way. It plays differently enough. I wonder if you could take an old familiar game, take it into like a completely different genre. And so instead of switching between, N64 and Xbox 360 graphics, you're switching between first-person shooter and point-and-click adventure or something like that. I don't know.
I think also one of the things that's appealing to me about this is kind of maintaining the fundamental geometry of what you're around while kind of changing the way that you interact with that, kind of in that like Soul Reaver way where like the rooms look pretty much the same, but you can like do different stuff in each of them. And so I think it's pretty important to maintain a perspective from that, because I think if you change genres as well, or like change them significantly, it might just feel like you're playing two different games. Like I'm playing the point and click version of Resident Evil, and then I'm playing the like, shooter version of Resident Evil, which is also cool, but I don't think would give that kind of like evolution feeling that I'm really like hot on here.
I would certainly like to collect a Resident Evil 2 remake amount of ammo for the original Resident Evil. That would be a handy thing. Let's say it's a first-person shooter. We could kind of pick our soup of choice there. But the first-person shooter, you're kind of navigating between these two geometries. What are the things that have changed in AI? There's like, maybe in an old version you can't even interact with NPCs or something. In the new one you can. Bad guys, the baddies, they purposely try and dodge. Maybe they can flank and do things in the new space. It's like, I'm also thinking about how we make the demake version or the original OG version not feel like kind of an easier version of what you're experiencing in the harder, like if you're toggling in combat or something.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the kind of game that I thought of when I thought of this, and that's the original release of Fear. Which I don't know, was that a Monolith game or whatever? Like the kind of first person shooter looked really good back then, still talked about as having like great AI. And in that you have this like really kind of cool slow-mo mechanic. And so I wondered if you could kind of take Fear and take that where the old one still holds up and is fun to play. And then in the modern one, have some kind of different interesting mechanic. Like maybe you can't slow-mo, but you can wall run, or you can like, you know, just do something else wacky. And so you've got like a lot of tactical options for switching between the two, and like some might be better suited for one situation or another.
That's kind of interesting. You could encounter, like, say in the old version, you kind of have a little bit more forgiving of an AI, but in the new version, you have something where like you have the advantage of being able to shoot through thin walls, like they could properly physics model that now. But of course, so could the enemies. So you can kind of like maybe use the toggling as a way to amp up intensity on yourself. Or I'm trying to think of like, I'm also thinking about like Fear had peeking around corners, right? I feel like I never see peeking in games anymore.
Yeah, well, I think the whole horror aspect is actually really interesting, because then kind of getting into like, you know, kind of the third act of the game or whatever, you could break your own rules, and that would be like a great moment. You know, imagine you're kind of like playing the 2005 version, and then suddenly like the 2019 big baddie is like kicking down the door in what you thought was kind of like a safe retro space, and then you can kind of start like mixing those worlds after clearly defining that they were like separate.
Yeah.
Right, the same way that the old game couldn't necessarily like hold the enemy in memory, right? So if you're just far enough away, you are truly safe and gone, in the way that like that Resident Evil 2, they're like, well, guess what? Mr. X is like here to stay. He's going to follow you everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
That fundamental concept of having them intrude on each other's space, or like the reality slowly collapsing there, and like you're in the 2019 one, and you open up a door to a room, and it's almost like Doom 2016, where suddenly you're in the retro room, and you're like, whoa, okay, all the rules are different in here.
Yeah, and I think that works really well, you know, not to take us down the path of we're remaking Fear, but like that's a really good concept for horror, I think, because it's just that kind of like destabilizing, like I don't know what to expect here. And the original Fear had so many things where it kind of like it would put you in a blood-filled hallway, and then the hallway would be fine. And then, you know, it's like horror games frequently do that, where they just throw you into a weird situation and then pull you back. And so you're not quite sure what's going on.
Yeah. Oh, we are out of time on that one. We always give ourselves time limits because we could go on forever. And I feel like, you know, sometimes you're just barely kind of scratching the surface. And I feel like we've really gotten to the meat, and I want to keep going on that one. But we do have to call ourselves. So what are we going to call whatever this game is now?
Man, that title of the mission in Titanfall 2, Effect and Cause, is so perfect. I'm wondering if we could steal like a variation on that somehow. It's like, look, I'm allowed to name something what a mission was called. That's not copyrighted, right?
Yeah, sure.
I know we're out of pitching, but I do like the idea of this potentially just being a made up original game. Like there was never an original, but you're kind of throwing back to the original.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
you
like
could make it really retro looking, like
or you could even call it like cause effect parentheses 2020.
Yeah,
that's fun. Yeah, put the year in the parentheses afterward. Cause effect 2020 is pretty good.
I guess we can call it 2019 because it's as real now as it's ever going to be.
It's coming out in the next 6 months.
Yeah, it was it was written in 2019, so we're good.
That sounds good. I like that one. We're off to a good start here. Since I went first last time, Q, why don't you go first today? First, right. Meaning second in this case.
I know we're ever concerned about repeating ourselves as we're only 2 years in, but here we go. Here's my pitch this week. I've been thinking about a Her Story like game where you're sort of driving through either videos or maybe playable memories of people, but you kind of sprinkle in some of the Assassin's Creed-iness of you're exploring your own family and ancestor history and their DNA, and potentially you're trying to figure out, maybe a couple of them have done some pretty extraordinary things, and you're trying to figure out who's who and how it all connects together.
All right, well, let's go ahead and start the clock there. Is this video footage that we'd be looking through? How do you kind of conceptualize the moment-to-moment looking?
Yeah, I think that you could kind of make whatever UI conceit you want in your mind. I was also thinking about maybe visualizing it with like exploring strands of DNA or something like that. I think the coolest part for me is trying to do it in a way that is nonlinear and is very much based on your own initiation and discovery. Maybe you have to explore different books or, archive, something like that to stumble your way through it.
The visual aesthetic that immediately jumped to mind when you were saying that was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and how they kind of like wander through these like memories and stuff that they have that are physical spaces and they're connected, but they kind of shouldn't be. Like it's like a bookstore just opens onto a beach or something like that, and have that be kind of like, we don't remember things in like perfectly linear lines. We have these kind of like bizarre connections. And so maybe you could make it kind of, if not open world, at least like a kind of spokes of a wheel, and you could decide which direction, like kind of along which memory to go from some sort of central hub.
Maybe they feel a little bit more like Tacoma or something like that, where you're like physically exploring a space, and as you're in each of the spaces, you're kind of like, okay, who am I right now? Like, who am I in this space? As opposed to like, who's talking to who. I feel like that's established relatively quickly in Tacoma, in a way that discovering like who you are, potentially who the ancestor is that you're experiencing this memory through, could slowly be sort of revealed to you. Oh, this person was the person, that was on the beach, as you said.
I wonder if we can kind of mechanically explore like a mechanical metaphor for the types of research that people would have to do into their own family history before the time of like 23andMe, which I feel like Assassin's Creed is kind of like the 23andMe of this idea, where it's just like, oh, it's magic, it's science, just send away your DNA and they'll just give you the story and you don't question it because it's right, because it's science. But back in the day, like people would get like, there were services that would kind of help you through the process of researching your family history and telling you kind of like where to look, and looking at old books and old newspapers and old, like, I don't know, manifests of ships and stuff like that, and kind of tracing your family history back through that way. And it made me think of, there was a Sherlock Holmes game. I think it was Sherlock Holmes Nemesis, one of those Frogwares games. I think that's the name of the company. But that one had some mysteries where like you really had to, go into a bookstore, find the right book, read pages, and use your own brain to put together these puzzles, because the game wasn't taking notes for you. It wasn't doing all of this for you like most games do. You can't just open a book, immediately close it, and your character retains all of the knowledge in the book, like you can in Skyrim or something like that. And so, if we can somehow kind of represent the process of researching, but making it more kind of accessible in that like Edith Finch style.
So returning to the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, in that they bring like kind of all the items that like remind them of the person that in that movie they want to have erased. And in her story, there's that thing where you're searching keywords, you search like sister, and then like videos with sister come in. So what if you were kind of doing that, where you had a number of items from this family member and you could combine them in different ways? Maybe it's like, if you pick up their photo album and their old globe, then it like gives you different memories than if you picked up the globe and a bottle of whiskey or something. You're kind of like trying to combine their memories in different ways, maybe using that same sort of keyword system that her story has.
I'd love if you learn how to do that through kind of watching things through the memories, like you would get in, like Assassin's Creed has a bit of that, where you'll go through a chapter, you'll get kicked back to the real world, and they'll say, I know where this artifact is because I saw my assassin plant it. Or in, what is that game called? The one about everybody goes to the rapture. That's the one where you see the scene unfold, and then like you kind of understand, oh, that's why the TV is on in this version of the real world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so then you would know, like, oh, the TV holds a significance that I didn't understand earlier, and so now I can use this to access some deeper memory or go in a different direction. Yeah,
Another item of prominence or something like that.
I think one of the things that's true just of the real world that it is kind of interesting narratively and maybe works also for us mechanically here is that, you know, we all live through many changes in media and storytelling. And so if you set this whole thing in some, you know, family-owned warehouse or something that hasn't been opened in years and years and years, and you're able to physically navigate the space, finding newspaper clippings, you know, there's some people who are going to be children during the time where that would be the way a story is told versus those people would be adults by the time maybe cassettes rolled around or 8-tracks. So having all these ways of like listening to and accessing files and, you know, kind of ingesting them. You're like, okay, so the kid... No, that can't be the adult from here because it sounds like they're younger when we're on CD and there's no way that the person got younger, right? So I thought I was listening to an uncle and maybe I'm listening to a great-grandfather or something.
Yeah, that's such a great source for twists too, because without spoiling kind of the central conceit of her story, there's a moment where you're playing that game when you like realize something big about the main character and it's like, oh my gosh. And then it kind of like recontextualizes everything you've seen thus far. And I really love the idea of having the kind of like methods that you're learning about these people actually be part of the learning process. You know, maybe you learn that like, actually, it turns out that this, you know, daughter born in the 90s really liked making her own antique newspaper clippings. And so you find out that like these things that you assumed were ancient were actually just like the weird hobby of a millennial.
Right. You find out one person is just a liar, right? You have one relative that's like assembling their disinformation sort of stuff, or they're a conspiracy theorist. And you go down this whole track of thinking, whoa, this member of my family was in the Illuminati or something. And because, you know, it's a family, you could use, you know, a relatively small cast of voice actors playing like sounding people because you'd kind of have that for free.
I wonder if it doesn't necessarily even need to be family if you wanted to kind of set it farther back in time, like Assassin's Creed types of settings where you get a little bit more kind of exotic locales. But I do think that like for being, if this was an indie game or something, I think keeping it as a family affair would make it a lot more manageable. It also makes me think back to over the New Year's, my partner and I went down to New Mexico for vacation just because we'd never been before and we were always curious. Literally no other reason. That's a good enough reason to take a trip somewhere. One of the places that we went to was the Meow Wolf Museum in Santa Fe, which is like a pop-up museum like you would see written in the articles, but like a permanent fixture. And it's a really cool, like interactive, immersive museum of art where you are kind of thrust into this narrative that kind of creates this big facade of a very normal looking house. But as you get further into it, you start to kind of understand things about the family that lived there and some strange things that happen. And then you enter on all these weird dimensions through various openings in the house. Like you can go, you know, crawl into the washing machine and emerge in this weird disco room, where you can crawl through the refrigerator and go into this other like space age location that all this stuff is connected to. It's more fantastical in that sense than what we're necessarily getting at. But I wonder if there's some room for fantasy in this, in that we are just kind of filling in the gaps where the information isn't complete. And kind of like in Edith Finch, you got the impression that some of the fantastical elements were just due to like the embellishments that were made to the story over time.
Right. Yeah. There's that brilliant part in Edith Finch where you have the comic book that tells you the secret to like getting the key out of the music box.
Right. Yeah.
And it's this kind of like multi-layered thing of like, oh, this is just a way to progress in the game. But then it's like, why was this in that comic book? Like, how did they know? And that like poses all sorts of other questions. And so, yeah, the idea of like exploring memories and kind of like finding things that you wouldn't necessarily expect from that person or that time period, and then incorporating that into this like wider and weirder than you originally thought narrative is really appealing.
You could also go full fantasy sci-fi on it, and if you're able to piece together enough of the story to know, you know, like you were talking about, Jacob, objects of importance that entered into these people's lives, either through gifting or whatever, and realize at the end that, like, you have to step through some metaphysical portal thing and get the right objects to the right members of your family so they actually pass them on and tell the stories is, could be just a nice way of like rounding it off and also giving a really exciting, final act or whatever.
Well, we have to call this one before it gets way too metaphysical. This is very cool. I like this one. This one came out really well, I think. What are we going to call it?
I think you got to put memory in the title somewhere, right? You could do a kind of like indie title, like Memories of Us or Memories of You or something like that.
I don't know, like if you received a letter from somebody that called you back to kind of like an Edith Finch, it could be called Memory Card.
I was going to go with something that was like Stories Told or A Story Told. So it sounds like we've got a lot of viable things for this.
See, Stories Untold is a game, so I don't want to get too close to that. Although, cool game, check it out. Definitely do get close to it in your free time.
Okay, so we have, if you guys have two good options, so tell them to me and I will flip a coin.
Well, we don't necessarily even have to stop here. Like we can keep brainstorming.
No, this is it. It's one of these two things.
I'm breaking a pool cue and I am putting it in front of you both.
I guess I'm trying to figure out, I want to have like a memories of, and then somehow make it clear that it's like the player, like kind of insert them into the title somehow. So they're already conceptualizing like themselves as part of this narrative.
Memories of Orion.
That's it.
Memories of Orion.
It's sci-fi now. It takes place in space.
Memories of Andrew Ryan. That could be the tie-in.
Well, Memories of Orion is pretty okay.
Memories of Orion, like the belt?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you can make that part of the game.
That. That's kind of cool because it has this kind of mythic quality to it as well.
And then you could just do like a Men in Black twist where Orion is the name of the cat.
That's perfect.
All right. Yeah, I think that works out. I think we've hit upon something nice there. I'm going to round out the show today with the third and final pitch. And this is one that I'm very nervous that I've pitched before because it's an idea that I've had for a very, very long time, but I don't know if I've pitched it on here before. It's not quite a video game, but let's see what we can do with it. And if I have pitched it before, then feel free to stop me and I'll do something else. But basically, I was really fascinated in undergrad when I read about a psychological experiment that was done. Basically, my undergraduate and my graduate as well, both degrees are in psychology. And so I've always been very interested in kind of the psychological sciences. And one of the interesting phenomena is that nothing that we perceive is happening simultaneously when we perceive it. Everything that we witness is on a kind of a short radio delay in a way, because our brains are constantly kind of fudging the image of the world to kind of like make everything make a little bit more sense, because there's a lot of things that just to keep cause and effect in order, since sound is processed slower than vision is, it kind of slows down the vision signal, and it so that the two things, the cause and the effect, both line up in our brains. And so, everything that we are seeing is already, however many milliseconds old by the time we are witnessing it and perceiving it at the time. And they found that this ratio was variable and could be manipulated. And so they ran these experiments where they had I don't remember exactly the setup, but it was like a flash on screen followed by simultaneously with the tone. And then you would hit a button when you perceived it, or something like that. And so they started kind of drawing these two stimuli that were linked together mentally farther and farther apart until, they kind of reached that limit of how far apart your brain would kind of mush the image together. And then suddenly they removed that delay, and so they were happening kind of right on. And people perceived, because they were reacting to one of the two cues, they perceived their action as taking place before the event that caused them to take that action in the first place. So, just through the removal of a delay that the brain was accounting for, it kind of created this false reversal of cause and effect. And so I've always been curious, if this could be worked into a video game somehow. If, for instance, in a first-person shooter, you would be able to kind of draw apart a delay in between input and what you're seeing on screen or something. I don't know. I know that we're already kind of working with variable delay technology based on television screens and computer monitors and input methods and all of that. But, for the sake of the science, if we could do it where we could create a delay in the normal game and then shorten that delay in moments of high action so you feel like you're really kind of like acting without thinking or acting before perceiving a threat or something to kind of give you that heightened flow state. So I don't necessarily have a game in so much as just like, is this a mechanic that could work, and in what situations could it be cool and appropriate? So it's a very loose mesh of ideas. Let's see what we can do with it. Starting the clock.
Okay, I adore this. I am so in for tricking one's brain. And the thing that I just thought of, which may or may not kind of be able to link into the broader idea, is I said I play Beat Saber every day. And I think people get this way with rhythm games a lot, where you will do things so quickly and so kind of instinctually that if I had to like piece out what the movements of my hands were while I was doing, kind of some of these big combos, I would have no idea what I was doing. But since I've kind of been trained on the notes similarly to how you just like learn musical notes, you kind of know them without thinking about them. So I'm wondering if we could introduce something like that into the game and make it instinctual and then shorten the delay so that it feels like you're responding before it happens, like you talked about. Kind of make it, I think it would have to be a very easy action, like hitting a button when you see a light on the screen. But something like a rhythm game, those are pretty easy actions. Those are just like Guitar Hero, you hit the note and strum, or in Beat Saber, you just kind of throw your arm one way or another. And so I feel like kind of taking a simple action like that is really conducive to this idea of like making reactions seem almost like they are predicting events.
I think it's a little tricky with rhythm games because the timing is important with every game, but like timing being rhythmic is such a kind of determining factor of doing well.
Right.
And if you start messing with like delays, then all of a sudden it's kind of like fudging the rhythm a bit, which I'm sure would be like actually fine because our brains can keep up with that small a degree of changes without any trouble at all, I'm sure. Like when you're listening to a live band versus like a robot playing the exact same tune, like there are, fudginess in the tempo that we don't even perceive. But I wonder if there's games that are like that, like endless runners or platformers or stuff that like where you have to kind of react with very simple ways in, very kind of simple setups that could still kind of like take you into this different headspace.
One of the things that comes to my mind when I'm thinking through this is, do you remember in the, speaking of first-person shooters and remakes, Prey in 2017, 2018 Prey, whatever it was, the mimics kind of, we're getting pretty good at video games being able to simulate very erratic type of movements. And I also know like part of how the brain processes things is like we've all had the experience of driving to work and not maybe, or, commuting to work and not quite remembering exactly how we even got there. And it's because everything was so routine and nothing unexpected happened. And that's very much how we drive. That's how we like ride bikes. And it's when, the chicken crosses the road, when something unexpected happens, do our brains kind of come back online again. So I wonder if there could be the concept of something strange, something that the player has to notice or engage with that can kind of snap them back into a timed sync reality.
It's kind of like PT in that way, where you have this same setup that you kind of run through a few times, and then because you become so familiar with it, then you start to notice the little anomalies.
Right. So here's my same setup thing that is not a rhythm game, but is pretty simple inputs. Sports games. If you think about like like Wii Tennis, what you're doing in Wii Tennis is incredibly little functionally. Like you're not even controlling where you move. You're just kind of flicking at the right time. And so something like that feels like it's like a good fit for this kind of thing, because the individual actions that you're doing are not complex, but a lot of sports is reacting like, when you're playing baseball, I think you have to start swinging the bat basically as it leaves the pitcher's hands, like you're not calculating that trajectory. You are acting on this kind of learned instinct. And so even though swinging a bat in itself is a fairly simple action, it's really the timing and the kind of like context of it that gives it the skill required.
There's also another type of game that might play well with this kind of setup. I don't know exactly what to call it. Maybe a hallway game or a pipeway game. But there's, I don't know, just throw out a few examples. Things like Brain Pipe, A Plunge to Unhumanity, or a Luxuria Superbia, or Dyad.
Quit making up names.
You're very good at making up game titles.
No, but games where you are kind of like flying through a circular realm, and sometimes you just kind of have to move your character into like one corner to not hit a wall that's coming at you, or to collect little nodes or something.
It's the Sonic bonus stage. Why didn't
like
you say the
Battletoads.
Sonic bonus stage?
Yeah, but those games always kind of put me in kind of like the mindset, because you're focusing so intently on a relatively small part of the screen, kind of like a shoot 'em up as well, where you're focusing on such a small part of the screen, and then everything around you is just kind of like swirling and giving you kind of like acid trip colors, and you just like you become kind of hypnotized pretty quickly.
Here's a question. Have you played Thumper to completion? Have you finished it?
Let's see. I think I've gotten pretty close, I feel like.
So what the last level of Thumper does that no other level in the game does is it starts warping the actual tempo of the track. That previously it has been incredibly fast, and the track has been varied,
and it's been like 5/12, so good luck counting it anyways.
Yeah. But like the rhythm has stayed consistent, but at the very end it starts kind of slowing down and speeding up, like it's being like stretched out and pulled back together. And it's this really trippy feeling, because for the whole time you've been doing something, and then suddenly it's throwing your rhythm off, and that is very much like the kind of like tunnel games that you were talking about, Ryan, where it's you're only, you've only got this one track, and you've only got these couple things you can do. And so really what matters is being able to react in kind of weird timings now at the end to these things coming at you.
I love the idea of, with the central conceit being like, listen, at some point, maybe even this game is going to visually lie to you. And we're going to set up a sound or a beat or a pattern in some way. There'll be something on the screen that says, okay, now do it with your eyes closed, because the thing that we're going to show on the screen is going to just totally mess you up if you keep looking at it. And so you have a video game that actually is asking you to not look at a screen for some period of time. It's, it's the full use the force, Luke, trust your instincts, all of that stuff.
That's not bad. That's maybe not the most like accessibility friendly thing, but I do love that idea, and I would like my own use the force, Luke moment in a game.
Well, for our friends who can't hear, we let them toggle between you can see it correctly or you can hear it correctly.
Part of what we are giving up as creators in this situation in particular is that all of this cool stuff would have to be things that we never tell anybody about that we put in our games.
Right.
It would have to be like completely subconscious, and people would just kind of feel that there's something odd and interesting about this game. And maybe we can write an article about it on Game of Sutra 5 years down the line or something, but it's not something that we could put on the box otherwise. I don't know if it would still like, people would be like looking for it and expecting it, and it would just change the way that people engage with it.
I think we'd get forum after forum of people going, the lag in this game is terrible.
Yeah. So it kind of makes me wonder if like games are already doing this, or this feels like the kind of thing that like Vlambeer has been doing already for years and just never telling anyone about.
I mean, I think there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes into online, just like any online game. I think it's kind of impossible to have like a perfectly seamless connection between like 16 players or 100 players or whatever. So I'm sure that there are these like weird little tricks they're doing with input lag and predicting behaviors and stuff. Yeah, but I don't think they want to tell any of us that, because if you find out that Fortnite is like adjusting your aim or something, then, gamers are going to burn down the house.
And that's an interesting point. Like, this is a tech conversation, but they have to be in a way. Like Bethesda's at E3 was just like, hey, we figured out how to make streaming a game feel correct. There's probably so much prediction and algorithms and like complication behind how they do that yeah, you would be like, I'm barely even playing the game once I knew what the software was doing for me.
Which is impressive, because I mean, even to predict how somebody plays Mario 1-1 is impressive, but to predict how somebody plays a Bethesda game, like, you could not believe the choices that I make in Bethesda games. So good luck streaming service with keeping up with my crazy Oblivion character. All right, let's close that one down. Let's come up with a name. Maybe it's not a game that we're naming, but like the middleware technologies. So maybe something that could sit alongside like Havoc Physics and Fmod Sound or something like that.
What if we called it like Perception Tech or something like that?
Perceptotech, or I feel like those two words are very close to meshing well together. I feel like we can get them there.
I also feel like there could be a cover with just like Perceptivve with like 2 V's or something like this. One of those cheesy.
Perceptivve with 2 V's.
Or somehow it's like some of the letters get ahead of each other, so it like it looks like the V is actually coming after the E, even though
all right, well, that'll be interesting to figure out in the show notes.
We all agree that Remedy's new game, whatever it will be powered by Perceptivve.
That's right.
Alan wakes for the first time. I don't even know what that means in this context. My polls are getting worse.
They're getting better for me.
We didn't have our standard community pitch, which usually comes from one of you out in the audience, because we had our good friend Jacob on the show today. But I would still like to put out there that all listeners, if you would like to send something in or send multiple somethings in, we always welcome people who send in a lot of things. We've had a few repeat contributors. We haven't heard from Spencer Saunders in a while. Makes me wonder what's happening in the Wiggleverse.
Yeah, Spanker Spoingers is missing in action.
Of course, yes. Obviously, also Spanker Spoingers, the naughtier version. Anyways, if you would like to submit a video game idea to be discussed and dissected on the show, you can do so by emailing playwrightcast@gmail.com. You can go to playwrightcast.com/pitch, or you can tweet us at playwrightcast. And in all of those instances, it is PLAYWRITECAST.
If you liked what you just heard, but wish I wasn't a part of it, go check out the other shows.
Oh, well, come on.
No, of course. So you can get more of H and more of Mr. Geller here on shows like the Kane and Rinse Review podcast. Of course, we have the Sausage Factory interviews with game developers and Sound of Play, the video game music podcast. And Jacob, actually, you just did a great, I was so happy I watched it on TV literally an hour before we recorded, why Mirror's Edge still looks so darn good. And I agreed with almost every single thing in that video. So
Thank
wonderful YouTube work. Keep it going.
Makes me kind of wonder what the almost is saying in there. There are 2 points that you vehemently disagreed on.
That's right. I don't like the execution of any of it. No, I thought it was wonderful. I mean, you talked about sort of they bake the lighting and how the simple geometry. And I mean, it's just a game where I think it was almost a mistake for them to try and make another one, wasn't it?
I mean, it's true that like we don't have to get into this, but like Catalyst doesn't look as good as Mirror's Edge. Like,
right.
It seems almost impossible, but like I genuinely think the 2008 Mirror's Edge looks better than the like 2016 one.
Well, when you start from kind of shooting for hyper reality and then kind of step back to shooting for realistic reality, like it is a step in a direction. I don't want to say right or wrong because that's an aesthetic choice, but it's, I feel like Mirror's Edge is kind of like a heightened version of the real world.
And I think, we won't spend the rest of the show on it, but there is something to people talk about, the early 3D stuff didn't age well. And I think it's because the early 3D stuff, the PlayStation 1 aesthetic, even though I'm sure there'll be indies that kind of heighten it and execute on it in the next few years, it just did not fully execute any original artist intent. It was always a compromised version of it in a way that, you could design for 8, you could design for 16-bit, and you can design for sort of modern 3D in that sort of way.
Except Parappa the Rapper, who still was charming.
Oh, that's right. He still looks good.
What a bro. He's a good one. But yeah, anyways, go check out that video. That is kind of challenging this idea that is often tossed around that video games will never look better than this, and how wrong we always end up being. But I'm pretty sure that we're there now. Yeah. I think
I mean, they're not going to look better than this.
Better than Sekiro? Come on.
I remember looking at the Heavy Rain tech demo and thinking games will never look better than this, and now I watch that and it gives me nightmares. That woman's teeth do not fit in her head.
Jacob.
All right. Well, anyways, Jacob, why don't you, if there's any places you want to point our audience, I know that we've been pitching your stuff all show, but Twitter, YouTube, why don't you go ahead and throw the name out there again just to kind of give people a place to look?
Yeah, so on YouTube, I'm just Jacob Geller. That's spelled Geller. And then on Twitter, I am JakobG42, like Jacob, but with a Y. And yeah, just go say hi to me either place. I will appreciate it and say hi back.
Special thank you to Protodome for the use of our theme song, Hello World, off the album Blue Noise. It's very good. Go listen to it.
All right. Well, it's been a long show. It's been a fun show. And on the way out, we always like to give our audiences something small, something bite-sized to chew on the way out. How about a game that simulates all of the fun of the carnival ring toss, but using only smartwatch controls?
Hey, we're going to put the digital crown to work. I'm excited.
All right. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.